Hi everyone, it's Katrina. Get ready for some unexplained archaeological mysteries. From the big Egyptian cover-up to traces of ancient giants and a mask from outer space, let's dive into the unknown together. An Egyptian conspiracy. There is a conspiracy underway to hide the truth of ancient Egypt's deepest history. News of a lost city hit the world press nearly a century ago, and then all mention of it disappeared. There were promises that the excavation of this nameless city would solve a mystery 4,000 years old. Then there was complete radio silence. No one has spoken of it since. What did archaeologists find that made them give up on this city altogether? It must have been truly shocking because now, a century later, archaeologists and researchers are still acting as if nothing ever happened. The first whispers of the secret city buried under the Egyptian sands came in 1935. In July of that year, the Sunday Express ran an article by Edward Armitage. Edward had just returned to England from Egypt, where he had been involved in an excavation of a nameless city believed to be 4,000 years old. In 1935, all the news surrounding this city was incredible. It was supposed to be a massive underground metropolis, like finding the Egyptian equivalent of New York City completely buried. All the news articles were talking about history being made, and then nothing. In 1936, suddenly there was no more information on this fabled city. All the articles on Egyptology in the following years were about tombs. Tomb this and tomb that, tomb here, tomb there. There wasn't any more news on the lost city. So did it disappear? Or did it never exist to begin with? It's hard to say now since it happened so long ago, but conspiracy theorists believe it was hidden for some unknown reason. There may be another incredible conspiracy underway right now involving everyone's favorite Egyptian monument, the Sphinx. Let me introduce you to Zahi Hawass, the former Minister of State for Antiquities Affairs in Egypt until 2011. Even though he's not the official boss anymore, Zahi Hawass still has his finger in just about every piece of the pie. He's been called the Egyptian Indiana Jones, but in reality, he's more like a retired archaeological boss, still calling the shots. Hawass has been quick to denounce any theories about ancient Egypt that he doesn't agree with. He has been especially vocal in denying that there is anything hidden underneath the Sphinx. But wait a minute, there are actual pictures of Zahi Hawass descending a vertical shaft behind the Sphinx into a flooded chamber. He's been filmed climbing through the very tunnels that he denies even exist. So why is Hawass and other Egyptologists so adamant that there is nothing under the Sphinx and that we shouldn't look too closely? Well, look closely at this. It's a sketch done of the Sphinx by Biot in 1798. See if you can spot the guy crawling out of the Sphinx's head. You see him, right, being pulled up by his friend? It seems that there is a tunnel leading through the head of the Sphinx to something underneath the monument. Here's an image from the 1920s that was taken from a hot air balloon. You can see the opening on the head of the Sphinx. I don't know what kind of strange phenomena have scared archaeologists so much that they've chosen to ignore history, but that seems to be what's happening. If you have any guesses as to what's beneath the Sphinx or what happened to the city under the sand, I'd love to hear them, so be sure to leave a comment. The coffin of a giant. For over 200 years, people have descended into the darkness of Kentucky's Mammoth Cave to marvel at a controversial phenomenon. In the early 1800s, visitors to the cave called it the steamboat. In the 1840s, people started calling it the giant's coffin. In the age of the internet, it seems the human race is divided on what to believe. Let me ask you, do you believe that giants once lived in North America? If the answer is yes, you need to see the giant's coffin for yourself. If the answer is no, you still need to see the giant's coffin for yourself. It's 175 feet beneath the surface, so I hope you're not claustrophobic. Scientists say that the giant's coffin is nothing but a really large boulder. It's roughly 40 feet long, 20 feet high, and 8 feet wide. It has almost the exact dimensions of a coffin. It's even shaped like a giant stone sarcophagus. There is no perceivable lid, but there wouldn't be, not after this much time. If this is a giant's coffin, it was likely used a long, long time ago. The countless eons have turned the original stone coffin into a coffin-shaped rock. Perhaps embedded inside of it is the fossil of a real giant. Then again, maybe it's just a rock. That's the fun part of unexplainable mysteries. You don't really know what's going on. What I would like to say is that Kentucky has a long and suspicious history with giants. Check out this newspaper clipping from 1911. It's a little sus, right? The headline immediately catches your attention by announcing a tomb filled with prehistoric giant skeletons unearthed in Kentucky. If you think people are gullible today, imagine what they would believe in 1911 if they read it in a newspaper. The meat of the article goes on to say that prosperous landowner Hugh Yates of Pine Grove found evidence of a prehistoric race on his farm. It all happened while Hugh was excavating beneath a high cliff on his property. He came across a grave containing one human skeleton of impossible proportions. The skeleton was big, the capital B. Hugh was so shocked that he called his neighbors to help him excavate further. Hugh and his small army of helpers burrowed deeper into the side of the cliff and entered an ancient sepulchre. It was crowded with human skeletons of unimaginable height. Each sarcophagus was about 12 feet long. Hugh Yates and his neighbors found coffins only a quarter the length of the giant's coffin in Mammoth Cave. But Hugh's coffins also weren't as deep. Perhaps the giants on Hugh's farm were the smaller descendants of the original humongous giants in Mammoth Cave. Perhaps these much older giants lived longer ago, tens of thousands or even millions of years before their smaller descendants were recorded in the Bible and in Native American legends. I don't know. What do you think about all this? Let me know in the comments below. And now for a quick break, because it's shout-out time! I want to give a big thank you to Ben Tower and Rebecca Freeman for supporting this channel. We wouldn't be here without you guys. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already to join the Origins Explained family. The God Mask from Outer Space. Some sensational news has upended the archaeological community. Some artifacts were found off the coast of Florida that don't make any sense. The artifacts are clearly quite old, and they seem to have something to do with the Inca Empire, yet they were made from a material not found on Earth. This is a phenomenon that archaeologists have only encountered a few times in the history of all archaeology. Items found off the coast of Florida contained a material called iridium. This is something you can't pick up at your local store. You might be able to buy a sample of iridium on eBay, but it's not going to be cheap. That's because iridium comes from space, landing on our planet when meteorites smash into the surface. There is some around, but not much. The Inca seem to have recognized that iridium was heavenly. It's as if they knew it came from space, so they molded it into important religious artifacts. Perhaps they believed the material to have divine properties. The artifacts found near Florida are masks molded in the likeness of Viracocha, the Inca creator god. It really feels like the Inca knew that their creator came from space, so they cleverly linked the metal from the crashed meteorites with Viracocha. I'm wondering if the Inca knew more about their creator god than the legends say. Did the Inca know that all life on Earth was made by intelligent beings from another world? Did they think that Viracocha came from the same realm as meteorites? There are some aspects of the masks that are harder to explain than the Inca's motivation in crafting them. The artifacts were dated at 12,000 years old, which doesn't make any sense when looking at the historical timeline. The Inca didn't even establish themselves as a civilization until about the year 1200. They definitely weren't making masks 11,500 years before that. There's another anomaly that's equally as confusing. To melt iridium, you must be able to get your furnace to roughly 2,500 degrees Fahrenheit. But the Inca had primitive furnaces that could hardly reach temperatures of 1,300 degrees Fahrenheit. So technically, they shouldn't even have been able to work with this metal. Maybe it's possible that the Inca civilization is older than archaeologists realize, or maybe there was a different civilization 12,000 years ago which had an identical art style. Which do you think is more likely, or do you have another explanation? Let me know in the comments. The man who became an accidental mummy. A man died in the Bulgarian capital of Sofia, and 16 days later, he was found completely mummified next to a railway line. Scientists are at a loss because they can't figure out how a person turned into a mummy so quickly without even trying. It took the Egyptians thousands of years to perfect the process of mummification. It took a 34-year-old man with a history of alcoholism one try. This unnamed person died on August 16, 2023, and was discovered on September 3rd. Scientists found that his insides had been reduced to structureless masses. In other words, his insides liquefied and his outsides mummified. Researchers in Bulgaria called it a process of precocious mummification. It's a process that is extremely rare and almost never seen in temperate regions. Only a handful of these incidents have been reported in all of human history. The forensic community is freaking out because they can't put the pieces together. But let's take a look at our ancient Egyptian friends. Let's look at how they mummified their dead. In ancient Egypt, mummification began with the removal of internal organs. Once the inside pieces were taken out, the rest of the person's body was dried with natron, which is a special salt mixture. The brain was pulled out through the nose and thrown away. I know it's gross, but that's how they did it. Egyptians didn't think the brain was important. They believed the human heart was the center of existence. The human heart held what the Egyptians called Ka, aka the spirit. After several weeks of drying the body, it would be anointed with oils and wrapped in the traditional mummy bandages. In other parts of the world, like in South America, the bodies of the dead were left in dry deserts or at the tops of mountains to be transformed into natural mummies. But nobody knows what happened to the Bulgarian man, whose skin was so dehydrated that it had turned into hard leather. The weather was not hot enough to transform him into a mummy that quickly. So what the heck happened to him? Let me know your theories in the comments. The Biot twang sound. It's been described as the sound of a frog burping in space. I like to think I have a good imagination, but I can't even figure out what that sounds like. Can you? A mysterious noise was recorded by microphones in the deep ocean 10 years ago in 2014. Ever since, scientists have been trying to identify it. They've been studying the so-called frog burp from every angle, and now they have come up with a potential solution. The unexplained noise, officially known as a biotwang, might be from a baleen whale. Lauren Harold from Google's AI for Social Good said it sounds sort of like a low-frequency moan. The moan is swiftly followed by a high-frequency beep-boo, beep-boo. It's all very scientific. To the untrained ear, these noises don't sound like they could have possibly come from an animal. But scientists say that most times the noises are indeed from animals. Plus, the biotwang sound was picked up while surveying whales off the Mariana Islands, near the legendary trench that shares the same name. It's an area known to be frequented by Abertus whales. Researchers are pretty sure the noise came from a whale, and they've even had help from artificial intelligence to confirm it. Scientists put more than 200,000 hours of marine audio data into an AI algorithm program to look for matching frequencies. The AI was then able to match marine noises to the animals that make those noises. The frog burp in space was matched to a whale. It's a little disappointing because a lot of people were hoping for something more dramatic. The noise was so weird that if it could have been linked to an unknown sea monster or a lost piece of ancient technology deep at the bottom of the Mariana Trench, that would have been very cool. Not that this discovery isn't cool. With this incredible AI software, scientists might be able to listen in on all of the different sounds of the ocean, including whales communicating over vast distances. Now, if they could just create a Google Translate program for whale speech, we would all know what they were saying. The lost art of pyromancy. Could ancient Chinese pyromancers really read the future in the flames? It's a question that I can't help but feel is beyond the scope of scientific understanding. But for centuries, divination played a major role in Chinese civilization. Today, the word pyromancer likely brings to mind someone manipulating flames with their mind. But that is not the origin of the word. One of the first practices of ancient Chinese culture was pyromancy, and those with the skill could read the future by looking at cracks in the flames and by things burning. The practice of pyromancy has been lost for so long that any artifacts related to it are highly coveted in modern China. The oldest known pyromancers date to the Shang dynasty as far back as 1600 BC. Of course, there weren't just pyromancers. There were also diviners and oracles who threw bones and tortoiseshells. Belief in seeing the future was so strong that when it came to the administrative functions of Shang rulers, they were helpless without their pyromancers. In times of trouble, they would seek the divine guidance of such magically inclined people. Anything to do with the harvest, warfare, or with royal disputes required a keen-eyed pyromancer's help. You might even be a pyromancer without knowing it. Have you ever caught yourself staring at an open flame for longer than appropriate? Maybe you were drawn by some inherent power within. At the ancient site of Yinshu, there is proof of just how important seeing the future was. The Oracle Bone Pit is a literal pit filled to the brim with hundreds of cracked turtle shells used by diviners to predict the future. In fact, these castaway turtle shells are still inscribed with Oracle Bone script, which is thought to be the earliest known form of Chinese writing. You might be thinking pyromancy fell out of favor a couple centuries ago, maybe in the Middle Ages, but it happened a lot earlier. During the Zhou dynasty, which began in 1046 BC, the art of pyromancy declined. Oracles were suddenly seen as charlatans and frauds, and this was more than 2,000 years before Europeans went witch crazy and started burning everyone at the stake. It is unclear why the ancient Chinese abandoned their magical beliefs so early on compared to everyone else. This happens before you die. Most people don't know exactly when they're going to die down to the last minute, but according to medical professionals, you might be able to see the early warning signs. Something happens before we die that scientists cannot understand. Julie McFadden has a bachelor's degree in nursing. She worked in an ICU for over a decade and then became a hospice nurse. She has seen a lot of people on their deathbed, and she has seen a lot of strange things happen as well. Julie said that there is a phenomenon that neither she nor any other medical professional can explain. She calls it the rally. Julie said that when someone is extremely sick and about to knock on death's door, they suddenly look like they're getting better. The person will start to walk, talk, and eat as if everything's fine. They laugh and joke, seeming to be on the up and up. Then, a day or two later, almost always during the night, they pass on to the other side. This is such a noticed phenomenon that scientists are hard at work trying to figure out why it happens. Julie calls it the rally, but German researcher Michael Nahm calls it terminal lucidity. Anecdotal reports of terminal lucidity date back 250 years. More recent scientific studies say that 84% of people experience the rally in the exact same week that they die. Half of the people who experience the rally die later that same day. So why does this mysterious rally occur? While scientists continue to investigate, it remains a fascinating mystery. Perhaps it's the body's final surge of energy, a last-ditch effort to cling to life. Or maybe it's a spiritual phenomenon, a glimpse into the afterlife before the final transition. Death is one of life's biggest unexplained mysteries, and everything related to it appears to be unsolved. The Langenburg Alien Encounter. In 2024, the Canadian Royal Mint produced a commemorative coin. This coin brought back memories of the terrifying encounter of 1974. This coin commemorates one of the most chilling UFO visits in modern memory. If you happen to be in Canada and you love all things alien, you better get your hands on this coin before it's gone. The encounter was in the small town of Langenburg in the province of Saskatchewan. On September 1st, farmer Edwin Furr went out into his fields and saw 5 flying saucers at the edge of a creek. What would you do if you were doing your morning chores and there were 5 spaceships parked on your property? In the case of Edwin, his heart didn't even skip a beat. He thought someone was playing a joke on him, as he wouldn't have imagined in a million years that these saucer-shaped objects had really come from outer space. He walked toward the objects, curious to see how his friends had gotten them onto his property so stealthily. But once he got near enough, Edwin realized the saucers weren't on the ground. The objects were hovering about a foot above the dirt and rotating like the gravitron at your local fair. This was when Edwin's heart started to pick up the pace. He walked backwards, not taking his eyes off the objects, but too afraid to get any closer. He got onto his swather, but the stubborn engine wouldn't start, so he sat there and watched the ships for about 15 minutes. Alien enthusiasts dream about having this kind of encounter. Few living people have seen this many flying saucers up close and personal. Edwin said they didn't make any noise. The ships hovered completely still until suddenly a grayish vapor was discharged from underneath them, and they rose up and disappeared. Edwin said they were up and gone so fast that it was faster than you can clap your hands. The ships went from 1 foot above the ground to outside the planet's atmosphere in less than a second. The aliens actually left evidence of their little parking escapade behind. When Edwin investigated the place they had been hovering, he found 5 perfect circles in the grass. The grass was flattened clockwise, just like what you find with crop circles. The icing on the cake is that each of the clockwise circles was extremely radioactive. Everything else in this story can be dismissed as hearsay, speculation, or a farmer weaving a tall tale. But the fact that each circle was radioactive is very convincing. It's not as if Edwin went and got himself some plutonium and rubbed it all over the ground for a bit of publicity. In the aftermath of the incident, Edwin became a local celebrity. He said he did thousands of interviews. People came to his farm on buses from China, Japan, and Australia. The Royal Canadian Air Force showed up to speak with him, and so did the US Air Force. The fact that 2 government air forces questioned Edwin says a lot. What do you think actually happened here? The most haunted castle in the world. What if I told you there is a castle in Ireland so haunted, so sinister, that even the bravest souls fear to enter after dark? A place where the line between the living and the dead is blurred, and evil lurks in every shadow. Welcome to Leap Castle, located on the Emerald Isle in Ireland's County Offaly. Leap Castle has more ghosts and spirits than the Ghostbusters would be able to take down. It doesn't matter if you believe in spirits or not. Leap Castle has a seriously haunting atmosphere. If you could make it through the night alone, I would be very impressed. The ancient fortress stands amidst the rolling hills of the Slieve Bloom Mountains, and while it looks picturesque during the day, things get very different when the sun goes down. As of 2023, the castle was owned by the Ryan family, who have been living in the stronghold since 1994. The castle itself is visibly quite a bit older, built in the early part of the 16th century. According to legend, the castle was built by the O'Carroll clan on the remnants of a prehistoric Druid site. This is the Irish equivalent of building a shopping mall in a Native American burial ground. No wonder this place is full of tormented spirits. Spirits like the Red Lady, who is said to be a ghostly woman from the Darby family. She was among those who owned the castle after the O'Carroll clan. No one knows what happened to this mysterious woman. She shows up wearing red and drifts as ghosts do across the grounds. Paranormal phenomenon or silly legend? You spend the night and be the judge. There are also the spirits of 2 young girls identified as Emily and Charlotte. The specters of these young children have been seen at the same time as other strange happenings, like pictures falling from the walls and doors slamming shut. Sean Ryan has not encountered a ghost despite living in the castle for 30 years. He has never seen Charlotte, Emily, or the Red Lady, although he has experienced signs of their presence within the home. The one thing that Sean has encountered is scarier than all of the other spirits combined. It's known as the Elemental. Leap Castle has been home to massacres, occult rituals, raging fires, and unspeakable atrocities committed in its dungeon. Deep within the castle is a bare stone room known as the Bloody Chapel, and for good reason. It was in this room that the O'Carroll brothers slayed each other, and where prisoners were kept in chains. There is a long shaft in the Bloody Chapel that once had a bed of spikes at the bottom. Disobedient prisoners were thrown down the shaft to be impaled. So much blood has been spilled, and so many occult rituals have been performed that all the evil has manifested into an entity known as the Elemental. It's the only spiritual phenomenon that Sean Ryan has admitted to encountering. You don't see the Elemental as much as you feel it. As it moves through the castle, it leaves a disgusting stench behind. Sean has smelled that stench himself, and so have other visitors to the castle. It's a rancid odor that moves past you from out of nowhere, as if a big, stinky ghost just brushed by. Do you believe in ghosts or spirits or entities like the Elemental? Let me know in the comments below. Elongated skulls are genetic. Apparently, everything we know about elongated skulls is false. Scientists have it all wrong. Scientists have been telling us for decades that elongated skulls are the product of cranial deformation. Ancient civilizations such as the Maya and the Egyptians elongated their skulls using 2 simple methods. They would either bind a child's head with fabric, compressing their skull so that it grew oblong, or they would compress the skull using boards of wood to reach the same ends. This might be a complete and total fabrication of the truth. In Peru, scientists have found the elongated head of a newborn baby. The infant could not have possibly had its head elongated through an artificial process because it was just born. The baby's skull appears to be a result of genetics, not artificial human interference. The mummified head was found in a place notorious for cranial deformation, Paracas, where over 300 elongated skulls have been found over the decades. Mainstream scientists insist that all the Paracas skulls were made artificially, but there are experts who believe something else was going on here in ancient times. It's possible that Paracas culture was a race of people with a very peculiar feature. They had cone heads. Some people believe the Paracas culture may have been hybrids, half human and half alien. It's possible that following the flood, the Paracas culture was all that remained of the hybrid civilization destroyed by the Anunnaki, but that's a story for another day. This new find was announced by Brian Forster at Hidden Inca Tours. Brian said the baby had been dated to about 2,800 years old. It's in an amazing state of preservation, with parts of its skin and hair still intact. Even without a microscope, you can see that the infant's hair was auburn-colored, unlike the typical black hair of indigenous Peruvians. Yet again, this is potential proof that the baby belonged to a culture genealogically separate from every other culture on the planet. This was a pretty big bombshell, so you might need a minute to recover. Remember to leave a comment letting me know your thoughts. Is this skull a phenomenon, a one-time freak accident, or is it proof of aliens? What is a skyquake? They call them skyquakes, earthquakes that ripple the clouds instead of the ground. It's an unexplained acoustic phenomenon that's been happening for centuries around the world, and no one has ever been able to solve the mystery. Skyquakes have been reported in Europe, Japan, and the US. They've been heard with such regularity that there is no disputing their existence. Since the beginning of the 19th century, scientists have recorded the tremors in the air. One of the earliest documented skyquakes came in 1811 during a normal earthquake that hit New Madrid, Missouri. Along with the ordinary earthquake, eyewitnesses reported hearing cannon fire coming from the sky. A similar incident occurred in Charleston, South Carolina in 1886. There was a normal earthquake, but afterward there were rumbles in the sky for weeks. It was like the energy from the earthquake was transferred into the heavens, sending aftershocks rippling through the stratosphere. Skyquakes are not always associated with seismic activity. In New York, skyquakes can be heard so often that locals have started calling them the Seneca guns. It happens mostly around the area of Lake Seneca. People hear unexplained booming coming from above. Just like in 1811, it sounds like cannon fire. I'm only giving you a few examples, but there are lots of places around the world where people hear skyquakes. It's almost like an invisible war is being fought in the sky. So, what's the scientific explanation? Some of the most popular theories include amplified ocean waves, the release of gas from underground, and geomagnetic storms. There is also a possibility that the booms are made from pressure anomalies in the atmosphere. At the end of the day, nobody really knows. Have you ever heard a skyquake?
Thanks for watching. Be sure to stay tuned for extra content you might have missed. The Octavius Ghost Ship. According to legend, the Octavius was a ghost ship that was found off Greenland's west coast in 1775. The story claims that a 5-man crew of another vessel called the Herald saw the derelict ship and went aboard to assess the situation. Below deck, they discovered Octavius's 28-man crew dead, frozen, and perfectly preserved. The captain supposedly died sitting at a table in his cabin, with a pen in hand and his logbook in front of him. The bodies of a woman, a boy beneath a blanket, and a sailor with a tinderbox lay nearby. Unwilling to search the vessel, the boarding party grabbed the logbook and disembarked. The logbook's last entry was dated November 11, 1762, nearly 13 years earlier. According to the logbook, Octavius had reached the Orient in 1762, after leaving England the previous year. For the return voyage, the captain ordered the crew to sail through the Northwest Passage, a treacherous and frigid sea route through the Arctic Ocean, that serves as a connection between the Pacific and the Atlantic. This would perhaps explain why the ship's crew met such a tragic end, but Octavius was never seen again after the Herald crew supposedly found it, and its logbook disappeared long ago. Consequently, many modern historians have written the entire story off as a myth. The Tunguska Event. The largest impact event in the world's recorded history happened on the morning of June 30th, 1908, when a region of eastern Siberia was rocked by a 12-megaton explosion. Known as the Tunguska Event, the blast flattened an estimated 80 million trees over an 830-square-mile section of forest. Only 3 people died, according to witness reports, owing to the area's remote location. The Earth was lucky this time. Mineralogist Leonid Kulik led the first attempted expedition to the site in 1921, but harsh weather forced the team to turn back. They reached it on their second try in 1927 and discovered the destroyed trees laying on their sides in an outward radial pattern spreading from the epicenter. Locals were initially reluctant to discuss the event with Kulik's team. When they were finally willing to talk, they described seeing a bluish, extremely bright fireball soaring across the sky, followed by a flash and then a loud explosion. The shockwave reportedly knocked residents off their feet, shattered their windows, and killed reindeer. Scientists think that the explosion was caused by a meteoroid exploding in mid-flight as it hit the Earth's atmosphere. Based on the damage, it would have measured between 160 and 200 feet long, and was likely traveling at a speed of around 16.8 miles per second. It's believed that the rock heated up to 45,500 degrees Fahrenheit and blew up between 3 and 6 miles in the sky. It never actually hit the Earth. The blast released the equivalent of 185 Hiroshima bombs. But no impact crater was ever found, and there is no definitive proof that a meteoroid caused the massive blast. So no one can say for sure that this is even what happened. What researchers do know is that if an explosion this big happened in a populated area, it could easily wipe out an entire major city and its outskirts. Experts estimate that an asteroid the size of the one they believe was involved in the Tunguska event falls to the Earth once every 300 to 1,000 years. There have been much larger impacts, but they happened during prehistoric times, before humans kept records of these things, and before we even existed in the first place. The Dancing Plague. Out of nowhere one day in 1518, residents of Strasbourg in modern-day France began dancing uncontrollably. They continued dancing for days on end, and more people joined in the chaos. Historical records describe how a woman named Mrs. Trophia started dancing wildly in the street. It had a contagious effect on locals, particularly young women. At the height of the so-called dancing plague, around 400 people were busting a move. But they weren't having a fun time. They were in severe discomfort, and their strange, constant movements were exhausting. Many people landed themselves at the hospital, and rumor has it that as many as 15 dancers died daily when the bizarre sickness was at its worst. Doctors determined that the dancers were not possessed, even if they were acting like it, but that they were suffering from overheated blood. Lacking solutions besides putting people in the hospital, local officials built a wooden stage for the afflicted to use to get the dancing out of their system. Thankfully, the behavior seemed to subside on its own after about 3 months. To this day, experts are unsure of what caused the dancing plague. They think that it could have been mushroom poisoning or some other physical condition, or that it may have been a widespread psychiatric illness known as mass hysteria. This is a phenomenon that occurs when a large number of people subscribe to an idea without thinking critically about it. It's often driven by widespread fear and paranoia. The mass hysteria theory makes sense. At the time, the region suffered from widespread disease and starvation, and its residents were known for being superstitious. It's not surprising then that this is just one of at least 7 documented cases of dancing plagues happening there throughout the Middle Ages. And now for a very mysterious boy. But I first want to give a big shout out to Carol Freeman and Edwan Mong. Thanks so much for watching and supporting Origins Explained. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already and join the Origins Explained family. Casper Hower. A teenage boy appeared on the streets of Nuremberg, Germany one day in 1828, with an anonymous letter in his hand. It stated that the boy had come into the person's custody as an infant and that the guardian had never allowed him to leave the house, not even once. Another letter in the youth's possession identified him as Casper Hower and claimed that the boy's father was a cavalryman who had died. While he appeared to be physically healthy, the boy seemed mentally impaired. Because Hower provided no backstory about himself, police imprisoned him as a vagabond. Many people assumed that he was a feral child who had spent much of his life in the woods. He eventually opened up about his past, claiming that he spent his entire childhood confined to a dungeon, alone. Hower described his living quarters as a tiny cell with a straw bed. He said that he was given just 2 simple toys to play with and received only rye bread and water for nourishment. The boy supposedly came face to face with another human for the first time shortly before his release, when a man visited his cell and taught him how to write his name. The visitor concealed his face the entire time. Locals supported Hower financially, and he was taken under the wing of a schoolmaster. By all appearances, the boy thrived later in life, although he was the target of several attempted murders. He was stabbed to death in 1833, 5 years after being discovered. Nobody ever figured out who Hower really was or where he came from. To make matters worse, inconsistencies in his stories proved that he was a liar, making it even more difficult to distinguish fact from fiction. Where do you think Casper Hower really came from? Why did so many people try to kill him? Let me know your theories in the comments below. The Great Vowel Shift. During the Middle Ages, British speakers dramatically changed the pronunciation of the English language. Known as the Great Vowel Shift, this period of transformation began around the year 1400 in southern England and continued until 1700. Throughout the process, the sound of all Middle English long vowels and some consonants became so different it had long-lasting implication for things like spelling, learning how to read, and understanding English texts from before or during the period. Experts can't seem to agree on what caused the Great Vowel Shift. In their attempts to figure it out, they look toward the 15th and 16th centuries, when the biggest changes happened. In the aftermath of the Black Death, people migrated rapidly from northern England to the southeastern part of the country. Some scholars believe that this may have caused a mixture of accents that brought on broader changes in the way of speaking. Other researchers theorize that the shift resulted from French words being incorporated into the English language. On a similar note, the middle classes developed a tendency to apply French pronunciation to English words. This stemmed from the English aristocracy's decision to switch from French to English. Consequently, the Great Vowel Shift could have been caused by people overcorrecting their speech in a misguided attempt to sound more French. On the other hand, this hypercorrection may have resulted from anti-French sentiments, prompting people to try to sound less French. But the plain and simple truth is that nobody really knows what led people to speak so differently that the English language sounds nothing like it used to. Who were the Sea Peoples? Civilization began spreading rapidly throughout the eastern Mediterranean over 3,000 years ago. The area was home to numerous advanced ancient cultures, including the Egyptians, the Hittites, the Greeks, and the Minoans. During the late Bronze Age collapse between 1200 and 900 BC, a mysterious group known only as the Sea Peoples supposedly terrorized the region, wreaking havoc on the Egyptians and other societies. But their identity remains a mystery to this day. This ruthless seafaring group did not leave behind any monuments or written records. Knowledge of their existence is based solely on inscriptions left behind by the cultures they ravaged. One 13th century carving describes a tribe of naval warriors that no local population stood a chance of defeating. Based on the lack of mentionings of the Sea People's origins, it seems as though the Egyptians knew where they came from. In other words, this information was probably common knowledge, so ancient writers saw no need to write it down. Either way, none of the ancient texts about the Sea Peoples talk about their roots, leaving modern-day scholars to try answering this question on their own. The Egyptians described the group as northerners, suggesting that they may have come from Turkey, Sicily, or elsewhere in Europe. Some researchers have even theorized that the Sea Peoples were the Philistines, who were famously mentioned in the Bible for going to war with the ancient Israelites. In addition to not knowing where the civilization came from, experts have no idea what triggered them to abandon their homeland and adopt a lifestyle of raiding societies throughout the Mediterranean. Benjamin Kyle. One day in August 2004, a Burger King employee found an unconscious middle-aged man by the restaurant's dumpster in Richmond Hill, Georgia. He was naked, sunburned, covered in red ant bites, and had indentations in his head from blunt force trauma. The man was rushed to the hospital where he became known as the Burger King Doe because he didn't have any ID on him. He didn't know his name, claimed to have no idea how he ended up in Georgia, and was unable to think of a single person he knew. The confused patient, who called himself Benjamin Kyle, ended up in a care facility for the poor and homeless. Nurses routinely tried to help him get his memory back, but nothing he came up with led to his identity. Years went by, and fingerprints, DNA tests, and facial recognition technology failed to determine who he was. No one recognized his picture on TV. The mystery was finally solved in 2015 by a team of genetic genealogists. Using a process of elimination similar to how they help adopted people find their birth families, they compared Benjamin Kyle's DNA to information from records databases across the country. His real name is William Burgess Powell. He's from Indiana and had cut ties with his family back in 1976 before abandoning his car, home, and other belongings and disappearing. Police found him living in Colorado, but soon enough Powell had fallen off the radar again. His name disappeared from job records and other official documents after 1983. Naturally, Powell's family was stunned to hear that he was alive, but they welcomed him back to Indiana with open arms, and he's rebuilt his life in the hometown he doesn't really remember. While it's great that Powell has finally learned who he is, no one knows what went on during the decades-long gap between his disappearance and when he was found outside Burger King. He doesn't remember, and there's no real way of knowing if those memories will ever return. The Wow signal. On August 15, 1977, the Big Ear Radio Telescope at Ohio State University detected a mysterious signal coming from the direction of the Sagittarius constellation. Known as the Wow signal, the 72-second radio burst was 30 times more powerful than the region's typical background radiation. Simply put, it seemed alien in nature, and some saw it as evidence that life exists outside our planet. It got its nickname after astronomer Jerry Eamon scribbled the word "wow" on a printout of the signal. Although researchers were able to determine the relative area that it originated from, they failed to pinpoint its exact location or what caused it. They ruled out several causes, including glitches and known natural sources such as highly magnetic rotating stars called pulsars. The signal's frequency was measured at 1420 megahertz, which is the same frequency that hydrogen emits. This discovery further bolstered the theory that the Wow signal came from an artificial source. In other words, aliens. But not all experts agree that the signal's origins are extraterrestrial. Some think that there might be a rational explanation for it, and that there are probably natural causes behind it, such as hydrogen clouds or a star. In 2017, a team of scientists discovered new evidence about what may have caused the Wow signal. They found that at the time the signal was intercepted, 2 comets were passing through the same region in the sky. This could not only explain the signal itself, but also why the signal never repeated. The comets moved on in their orbits, so it would naturally be a one-time occurrence. But as plausible as this theory may seem, it remains unproven for now. Thanks for watching! If you'd like to learn about more mysterious, unexplained events, let me know in the comments below, and be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. See you later! Bye!